Hi, everyone. I'm Marla Miller from marlamiller.com, and I'm presenting another interview with um, an author who has been out here for a while. Eleanor Vince and I first met, back in the early 2000s. I invited her to my workshop at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, and she and a couple of other writers came down, and I believe it was a very fruitful workshop, but to be honest, it was so long ago. I was chatting with her before I started recording. That was a long time ago, but I remembered her, and fortunately, she remembered me. At that time, Eleanor was a brand new author, even though she wasn't brand new to writing. She's going to tell you her story. And the memoir that she was promoting back then was a memoir about her daughter, who tragically had died. And I believe it was a swimming accident. The memoir that she's going to talk about that just was released and already has gotten an award is called and dis Eleanor disconnected.
Correct.
Disconnected Portrait of a Neurodivergent Marriage. Marriage. I mean, this is fascinating. No wonder why you're getting attention with this book. Welcome, Eleanor Vincent, to 21st century authors and book creators. Um, Talking with Marla Miller. I got that wrong. I've played with this title because you're only the third person that I've interviewed. Um, and it's 21st century authors and content creators talking to Marla Miller. I added content creators because I have fallen in love with content creators. They are
Okay.
just brilliant people. And so I welcome you to this podcast that I hope, as I said to you before we started recording, I hope it has legs. Welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, Marla.
So
Delighted.
tell me, first of all, I want to talk about your book. Would you hold it up for the audience?
Sure.
Thank you. Disconnected. Portrait of a Neurodivergent Marriage. So I have some interest in this, and I had connected with Eleanor. We're on each other's mailing list, but when I saw the title and you had given a bit of an excerpt somewhere, I went, oh, I know something about neurodivergent. And I wrote a novel, Sweet Spot Now and Then, that really does profile a neurodivergent marriage, though I never, identified it as that. In my opinion, that's who he was, and that's who I was, married to him, kind of like lost in the dark. I kind of didn't know because back then we didn't know neurodivergent. The spectrum was not something that we talked about, but boy, are we talking about it now. So tell us your story, Eleanor, please.
Well, it's interesting that you said that during that marriage that you wrote about, you felt like you were in the dark because I also felt like I was in the dark. And I think that is the case for many, many women who marry autistic men who are high masking, which means they're very, very good at covering up their autism, especially during courtship. And that was what happened with me. Um, I knew he was quirky, but he was super intelligent and he
Yes.
read constantly. And we had the best sort of intellectual discussions. And during our courtship, he couldn't do enough for me. I mean, he was like Sir Galahad, opened
Was
every
he?
door, carried every bag, bought me beautiful jewelry, took me on trips. I mean, it was just over the moon. And what woman in her late 60s wouldn't fall for that?
No
So
one I know.
I did and ended up marrying him when I was 71 years old.
Really?
And what happened 3 months after we were married is COVID.
Oh, so you were confined together.
Correct.
Oh, all right, go on.
And so, of course, he couldn't
Yeah,
mask.
yeah,
Masking is
sure,
exhausting.
sure.
He was using all his masking energy at work. But as soon as it was clear that he wasn't going to be going to work anymore and he was locked down with me 24/7, a whole different side came out.
Yeah.
And it was really upsetting. I felt like I didn't know the man I was married to.
You probably didn't.
No, I didn't. And so I had already started writing the book before we were married. I was writing about a late in life romance.
Oh, really?
Yes, of two opposite
Oh, sure.
personality types. You
Okay.
know, the tech nerd and the artist and
Gotcha.
how different we were, but how somehow it worked for us. Because in the beginning, it did.
Yeah.
I was having a lot of fun. So I had started a book that I was at the time calling Better Late, which was kind of a Nora Ephron style, aren't we cute, quirky people, and isn't this funny? The funny misunderstandings we have.
Yeah.
Once COVID happened and the lockdown happened, and it became clear to me that it was way more than that, the book started to change
Yeah.
because the reality had changed. So during COVID, I was on in a Zoom workshop, an advanced craft class with a woman named Elizabeth Stark, who is a
I know
wonderful,
her. Yeah.
yeah, she's wonderful. And that saved my sanity. And so week by week, I was writing more and more and getting feedback from the people in that group and benefiting from Elizabeth's feedback as I went.
Yeah.
And before this even happened, I had submitted a proposal for a book of essays about resilient aging to a press called Vine Leaves.
Hmm.
And they're based in Athens, Greece. But they publish a lot of memoir. They publish collections. They're one of the few small presses that publishes essay collections. And I thought, well, I have a chance with a collection with Vine Leaves. So I had submitted this collection to them, and
And
they
the
sent me
collection was about
Resilient Aging.
and collecting from authors who could write
No,
about
no,
it.
it was my writing.
Oh, so it was a collection of
Yeah,
chapters by you. Okay.
my essays
Okay.
about growing older and the various aspects of that and how to approach
Gotcha.
it in a positive manner. I was writing a column for the community paper where I live,
Hmm.
Rossmore. I was writing
Uh-huh.
for the Rossmore News, a column called The Bright Side. So I took a number of those columns and adapted them into essays.
I've done that too. Yeah.
And Vine Leaves wrote me an editorial letter and said, we love the voice. We love a lot of the subject matter, but what we're really interested in is your late in life
Yeah.
relationship. Can you give us something that's more cohesive? And because I already had this memoir going, I wrote them back and said, yes, I can. And so I immediately began working very seriously on
Hmm.
this memoir and moving ahead pretty quickly. So the whole thing, once Vine Leaves got involved, the whole thing was drafted in about a year and a half.
Wow. And were you still living with your husband at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. And I was reading him chapters as I wrote them.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What was his,
I think his attitude was, well, that's how you see it. I don't necessarily see it that
okay,
way.
got
But
it.
he was flattered to be sort of the major
The
character,
star of a book.
correct. And he sort of his attitude on almost everything was, well, that's your life and this is my life.
Yeah.
The two just kind of barely intersect.
Yeah.
Pretty soon we were more like friendly roommates than a married
Gotcha.
couple.
If I can
So,
just throw in down right now, my protagonist in Sweet Spot Now and Then is married to a man named Norman Robinson, who also was a tech guy. And my understanding is that you're going to find a lot of neurodivergent people who go into tech. I have a client right now who is writing a novel, and he's neurodivergent and he's selling it through that prism. And so I've been able to really study his thinking,
mhm.
and it's fascinating and quite disconnected, you know.
Well, that's the book title.
Yeah, and he's okay with that because he wants to show the world the thinking of a neurodivergent
Uh-huh.
in fiction form. So we'll see how that flies, but maybe it's a caution to people who are attracted to tech types. There might be an underbelly, but anyway, it sounds like a fascinating memoir, and I know that you're selling it well. Um, Talk to me, if you would, though, about before this memoir and before your first memoir that you wrote in 2004, thereabouts, your path to the writing life. I know that you've been in it for a long time, but talk to our listeners about in what form that you were in it and then how you shifted. I just think those are interesting stories.
I think in looking back now, I've had already a very long life. So in looking back, I can see that it was sort of foreordained.
Hmm.
I was writing already by the time I was 12 years old. I think I wrote my first short story then. My mother
Fantastic.
was a playwright and an actress. My father was an actor, stage manager, and director, and taught drama at a college in Pennsylvania. So
Wow.
from my earliest age, I was immersed in
You were
story,
destined.
immersed in theater,
Yeah.
immersed in musical theater.
Gotcha.
My imagination was constantly being um, stimulated and renewed by these two people. Now, there were a lot of other things going on that were very dysfunctional, but in terms of the cultural and intellectual environment, it was an environment designed to produce somebody who was going to go into the arts.
A
And in
creative.
my case,
Sure.
yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
case, it was writing. So I was doing that already, at a very young age. And then in high school, I worked for my high school newspaper, was in advanced placement English, was writing, won an award from the National Councils of Teachers of English. And at that point, one of my English teachers took me aside and said, you're really gifted. You could have a career in this.
Hmm.
And that was eye-opening. At that point, it was 1965.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't know that anybody could be a writer unless you lived in New York and were a man and smoked a pipe. And, I,
Yeah.
I just didn't, it wasn't on my, it was just something I did and something I loved.
It's really it's reinforcing for me to hear you say that because we're in the same age group, and I was published by the Chicago Sun-Times at age 11, and unfortunately, I didn't come from your kind of family. Mine was dysfunctional, and I loved my mom and dad, and I love their memory. Nonetheless, um, nobody in my family said to me, "Oh, maybe you should be a writer."
Yeah,
Nobody in my family said that because we were working class. And as you said, the only writers that my parents knew were Mike Royko from the Sun Times. And, I mean, they didn't even read books.
right.
So for me to have even thought about going to college for writing I never even considered it. That's why I became a nurse, because I knew I could do that, right? And so, but you came from this incredibly talented family. And so I know that you've been writing your whole adult life, but tell us a little bit about the kind of writing that you had to do in order to pay the bills.
Yeah, well, I saw myself as more of a practical writer
Yeah.
and less of a creative writer. And so I went into journalism because that was the path that I could see for myself.
Yeah.
And I went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, never got a master's degree from there, but got some very good writing instruction and went to work for the Minnesota Daily, which is a very well respected campus newspaper there, and
Hmm.
wound up as the associate managing editor. So I really took to journalism.
Hmm.
And that's where I learned that it's possible to sit yourself down and produce 800 to 2,000 words in the space of an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Hmm.
And I took that skill and then went to work for several different newspapers.
Okay.
Um, and then ultimately, as time marched on and I had two children to support,
Yeah.
I transitioned into corporate work when I was in my early 30s because I
Mhm.
needed to have a means of supporting myself and my children.
Pay bills.
Exactly. And journalism wasn't, unless I was going to go to work for a major newspaper like the Washington
Correct.
Post or the New York Times, I wasn't going to make enough money to survive in the Bay Area with two kids. So I went to work for the phone company. And
Mhm.
I've always kind of laughed about that because Anne Lamott in one of her first books talks about how her most dreaded fantasy was of having to go to work for the phone company. So she took a
Pays the
different
bills.
path,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, but I was very motivated by the need for money and the need to, be a good provider and also a good mother for my kids. So I did what I needed to do and worked for the
Sure.
phone company for 10 years and then began work for Kaiser Permanente.
Mhm,
And that work was always involving writing
mhm.
or communications in some form. So I had a 30-year corporate career, but at the same time, I was writing essays, short stories, poetry, and decided in my 40s that I ought to go get a Master of Fine Arts because
Mhm.
I knew I wasn't going to work in corporations forever, or at least I hoped I wasn't. And I thought, well, maybe I could teach at the college level with an MFA. And also, I wanted to meet other writers. I was starving for community in that sense.
Sure. I'm looking at the time, Eleanor, and I don't want to make this too long of a video because people don't listen.
Right.
They just simply don't, unless you're Anne Lamott. Or, you mentioned it, Nora Ephron before, and she's my hero. And Nora started out in the mailroom, and she never thought that she started out in the mailroom when women stayed in the mailroom.
Right.
The men got to go up. That was their entry level, not the women. And so she's told,
Right.
I'm sure you've read a lot of her essays about that time in her life. And I think a lot of us who are in this age group, we have come to the writing life because we always wanted to be in the writing life, but we never thought that we could make a living in the writing life. And so then we took other avenues. But writing was always, for me, it was always paramount. I mean, it's what I did in my nursing career. I wrote, and I wrote a lot. And you wrote, and before you could get back to writing what you really wanted to write, which is creative writing.
Correct.
And you have certainly done that in the last 15 years. And so I'd like you to hold up your book one more time, because if people are interested in Disconnected, the tell me the portrait of a neurodivergent marriage. I think there are people out there who would benefit from this. And it's not to say that it will help them in their neurodivergent marriage, but maybe it will help them cope. Maybe
Oh,
it will help them
absolutely.
feel
That's
less
why I wrote
alone.
it because
Yeah,
I was looking for just such a book when I was so puzzled and
exactly.
so much in the dark, and I couldn't find one written from the point of view of a layperson
Hmm.
going through the process of discovery and trying to figure out how to cope.
Hmm.
So I wrote the book that I needed,
Yeah,
and I found books by very well qualified psychologists that were
sure.
helpful, but nothing from the point of view of a real person actually having this
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
So I wrote it for that reason because I wanted to help others. And it's my contention that this book would help anyone in a relationship. It doesn't have to be a neurodivergent relationship because we all mask. Everybody does, whether they're neurodivergent or not.
I've always said we have our public life and we have our private life with our family, and then we have our life that nobody knows about, and
Right,
that's inside our heads.
right.
And so I think that there's, you know, power in what you say. Marriage is tough, whether you're married to a neurodivergent or not. It's a tough proposition, and it can be fabulously rewarding. Um, but it has its moments. And I would suggest that anyone who is, especially I think more midlife and on, because this is when marriages start breaking down, frankly.
Right,
The
right.
divorce rate skyrockets, et cetera, et cetera. So for those of you who are listening to this interview, and I hope that many will, I would check out Eleanor Vincent's memoir about a neurodivergent marriage that unfortunately ended, but you've learned so much.
Oh, I
And
certainly have.
and you offer so much information in your book. I really thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and we'll be circulating it, and I hope that you will too.
Great. Thank you so much, Marla.
Absolutely. For those of you who are interested, one last thing. I'm looking for interviews. So if you're interested and this appeals to you, let me know. Toodles.